Alright, so we are on to 6.7, evaluating trig functions. So this is where you're actually going to utilize the unit circle and all the values that we found on the unit circle and all the values that we filled in on our trig table. If you have not yet done this, you need to do this and become very familiar with this trig table. So, and a copy of this will be in the Google Classroom. Okay? Alright, so for these first four, we're actually going to use our trig table that we came up with. So we're going to find, and we just got all of these values on this trig table came from the unit circle, right? At least the sine and the cosine. Then we derived tangent, cosecant, secant, and cotangent from those numbers. So let's start with 150. So I'm going to use my cosine column, and I'm going to look for 150 degrees. I'm going over to my cosine, and my cosine at 150 is negative square root of 3 over 2. Okay? Cosecant. Well, I don't have a cosecant on the unit circle per se, right? I have a sine, cosine, and tangent, but when we filled this chart out, that was one of the reasons we did that. So 2 pi over 3 is actually 120 degrees, and that's going to be here, and we're going to go find our cosecant, which is 2 square roots of 3 over 3. Okay. Tangent of negative 270. Well, I certainly don't have any negative measurements on this chart, but I know that if I start at 360 and I subtract 270 because I'm now going clockwise, I will end up at 90 degrees. So I now need to look for the tangent at 90, which is going to be 1 divided by 0, which is undefined. So that value is undefined. This is just helping you learn how to read that chart. Okay. And then sine at 405. Well, we definitely don't have 405 on this chart because our chart is 0 to 360. But if we subtract 360 from that, we can use a reference angle. So that's going to be the same as sine of 45. And our sine at 45 degrees is square root of 2 over 2. Okay, so now let's use calculator and see what we come up with when we're doing that. So let's do cosine of 150. And that gives me negative 0.866. We can go there. Okay, well, if I put this same value, these two should be the same value, right? So let's check. Negative square root of 3 divided by 2. And that's going to give me the same value. Okay, so one is in decimal form. This is what we call exact form because it's not having to be rounded off. This is the most accurate way to represent that. So those are the same. So secant of 210 would be okay, except for the fact that I don't have a secant button. Some newer calculators do, but I do know that secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So I can do that. So I can just say 1 divided by the cosine of 210, and I would get negative 1.155, we can call it. Oh, sorry, 155. Actually write down what I said. Negative 1.155. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay, same thing with cotangent. We don't actually have a tangent key, a cotangent key, but we know that this is the same as 1 over the tangent of 5 pi over 6. Now you can change your calculator to radian form every time you use a radian, or you can just convert that to a degree, which is what I do. So every 1/6 of a pi is worth 30 times 5. That means that's tangent, same as 150 degrees. So I'm going to do 1 divided by the tangent of 150, and that's going to give me a value of negative 1.732. Okay. A cosecant of 170 would be the same as 1 over the sine of 170. So I have 1 divided by the sine of 170, and that gives me a value of 5.759. Okay, so now we're going to use that inverse, find our inverse functions using the trig table. So now you're thinking about all those places in the unit circle where that cosine value would fall. And I just want you, without looking at the chart first, I want you to think about where the cosine is 1/2. So if I've got my unit circle, ooh, that's not much of a unit circle. Let's make it actually a circle. got my 30, 45, and 60 as my reference, right? And I know that my measurements are either going to be 1/2, square root of 2 over 2, or square root of 3 over 2. And really the way you can think about it is, we always know that square root of 2 over 2 is going to require a 45-degree angle. The 1/2 and the square root of 3 over 2, just think about whether you're dealing with the long side of each triangle or the short side. The long side is always going to be square root of 3 over 2 and a 30 by 60, 90 triangle. The short side will be the 1/2. Okay? So, let's think about cosine. Let's think about it without the table first, and we'll double check it with the table. So cosine is our horizontal measurement. So cosine of 1/2 is going to be the short side, and that occurs at 60 degrees. Okay? So I want you to think where cosine is positive. So cosine is positive in the first quadrant and the fourth quadrant, right? That's where our horizontal value is positive. So in quadrant 1 and quadrant 4. So if I were to take this 60-degree angle and drop it down here, now I'm 60 degrees from 360, so that's also going to give me a measurement of 1/2 at 300 degrees for cosine. And if I check my table at 60 degrees, I have a cosine of 1/2. And if I move all the way down to 300, I also have a cosine of 1/2. Okay, what about tangent of negative square root of 3? Well, I know the only two quadrants that my tangent is negative are in the second quadrant and the fourth quadrant, right? Because here you got a positive divided by a positive. That gives you a positive tangent. This is a negative divided by a negative. That's going to be a positive tangent. So second and fourth are negative positive and positive negative. So that's going to result in a negative tangent. So in my value where I have negative square root of 3, which is what we're looking for, would be at 120, and then again at 300. Let's check to see if that makes sense. So 120 and 300. Well, 120 is going to be right here, and directly across the circle would be 300, because 120 plus 180 is 300. Okay, so now when you're finding values, now you're just using that inverse function on your calculator. So when you're trying to find the value of theta, this is when you're going to, or your angle measurement, this is when you're using the second function. So you're going to say second cosine 0.2079 equals, and that's going to give you a measurement of about 78 degrees. Okay. However, in the circle, so 78 degrees is right about here. Okay, but where is the cosine positive? That's a positive cosine. So cosine is positive in the first and the fourth quadrants. So 78 degrees away from the middle would be 360 minus 78, which is going to be 282 degrees also. So that measurement of 78 is going to, that cosine value of 0.2079 is going to occur in two places within that unit circle. Okay, so I don't have a cosecant button on my calculator. Like I said before, some newer ones do, but you really don't need it. Cosecant is the same thing as 1 over the sine of theta. So if we know that, if we simply take the reciprocal of this ratio, we would get sine theta, right? I'm just flipping both of these fractions over. So sine of theta will give me 1 over negative 1.2062. So if our sine is negative, what quadrants does that occur in? That occurs in anything below the x-axis, right? So that's going to occur in quadrants 3 and quadrants 4. So now we can do second sine 1 divided by negative 1.2062, and I get a value of negative 56 degrees. So again, think about where that would be, right? So negative 56 is going to come back about here, roughly, and I should be in the third and fourth quadrant. So negative 56 degrees, which would also be 304 degrees, or it's going to be 56 degrees coming down from the x-axis. So we can do 180 plus 56 would give me 236 degrees. Okay. So again, we don't have a cotangent button, but we know that cotangent is the same thing as 1 over tangent of theta. So I'm going to flip both of those over. I'll get 1 over 1.42. If my tangent is positive, I know that has to occur in quadrants 1 and 3, because that's where both my sine and my cosine are negative. So when I divide those, I will get a positive. So we're going to do second tangent, 1 divided by 1.42, and that will give you a measurement of 35 degrees, roughly. And so in your circle, 35 degrees is about there. And I know that it's going to be about the same measurement over here. So instead of being 35 degrees up from the x-axis, it's going to come all the way around, be 35 degrees below the x-axis. So 180 plus 35 is going to give you a measurement of 215 degrees. Okay. So really I want you to start thinking about where these measurements would be positive or negative and which quadrants those would occur. Okay. Okay, so on the second page you can go ahead and try some of these on your own and then come back and check your work against mine. Alright, so this is really more practice, and do you actually know how to use your calculator? So cosine of 234 is going to be a negative value because we know cosine is negative in the third quadrant. So we have negative 0.59. Cosecant of 128 is the same as 1 over the sine of 128, and that gives you a value of 1.27. And cotangent of negative 28 is the same as cotangent of 332, which is the same as 1 over the tangent of 332, which gives you a value of negative 1.88. Before you start these, I want you to think about where cosine is negative, where cosecant would be positive, where sine would be positive, before you do any of that. So cosine is going to be negative on the left side of our unit circle, so in the second quadrant and the third quadrant. Cosecant, of course, is the reciprocal of sine. If that's positive, that's going to happen anywhere it's above the x-axis. So that's going to happen in the first quadrant and the second quadrant. Sine theta of 1.2, we should think about that for a minute. What do we know the radius of a unit circle is? Well, the biggest it can be is 1, right? Or 0 or negative 1. This is a no solution, or you could say undefined. Cannot have a sine value or a cosine value larger than 1. Okay, so let's go back and do this. So cosine, second cosine of negative 0.8481 is going to give you 148 degrees. So that takes care of our second quadrant. So if we think about that, 148 will be right about here. So it'll be 32 degrees up from the x-axis. So since we know it's going to be in the third quadrant, that's going to be 32 down. So 180 plus 32 is going to give you 212 degrees also. Those are your two measurements. So this means everywhere in the unit circle that that value occurs. Okay, so we know sine of theta, then is going to be the reciprocal of what our cosecant was. So second sine 1 divided by 1.43. Let me try that again. Second sine 1 divided by 1.43. It's going to give me a value of 44 degrees, roughly. So theta equals 44 degrees. I know that's going to happen in the first and second quadrants. So if I think about my unit circle, and 44 degrees is about here, that's a really bad middle. There we go. Okay, so 44 degrees would be about here, and it would be over here. So then we just subtract 44 from 180, and we get 136 degrees for our two measurements. Okay, that's all of 6.